The European View Podcast. Your place to navigate the insights of our policy journal, brought to you by the Martens Centre. With Sara Pini.
Hello and welcome to the European View Podcast, your new way to navigate through the main issues of our policy journal with valuable insights from the authors themselves. I'm Sara Pini, a senior research officer at the Martens Centre, and I'm glad to welcome today's host, Janne Leino, who is now director of the Helsinki EU office, but he has previously worked as program manager for foreign and security policy at the Konrad Adenauer Foundation in Brussels and as head of the Hans Seidel Foundation in China. And it's drawing from this extensive expertise on China that he wrote on the latest issue of the European View an interesting article titled "Walking on Eggshells: The Twin Transition and Europe's Quest to De-risk from China." As always, you can find this and all the other European View articles on our website, martenscenter.eu. So thank you very much, Janne, for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Sarah.
So your article focuses on the EU's efforts to de-risk from China and offers a new comprehensive approach, which takes into account also areas that do not directly fall under EU competence. Why do you think this approach is important?
Well, I think in order to explain that, it's also interesting to take a quick look back. So the de-risking or the de-risking strategy or outlook was announced by Commission President Ursula von der Leyen last year in March. And since the European Union has done a lot of legislation. We can talk about that later. But what it has not done, it has not changed its previous outlook on China, which still dates back from 2019. And in this strategy or outlook on China, the European Union defines China as a strategic competitor, as a partner, and as an economic rival. So if you want to de-risk from China, I think next to the economic rivalry, you also have to take into account the systemic rivalry aspect as defined by the European Union itself. And this is not something that normally falls in the competencies of the European Union. I'll give you three short examples. One example is the area of education, which is usually a national or even in some countries like in Germany, a regional prerogative. It is important for me, for example, that our children learn about China, yes, about the economic prosperity, about the glass houses in Shanghai, about the poverty reduction, but also about issues like human rights, minority rights in Taiwan, Xinjiang, the issues on Hong Kong. And this is something which is not regulated by the EU, but we should be careful that we give this view. A second example from the area of media or disinformation, this is something where the European Union has rights in external action. So, for example, the EAS, the Foreign Office of the European Union, has published a first report on foreign information manipulation where it classifies China and Russia as threats to the European Union. But it's in national competencies to react on this. And this gives China basically an entry point to the European Union because some states are very vigorous about this and they defend the right, but some states are less. So with this, China can enter the European information space through a country it chooses. And thirdly, we also should look at issues on security and defense. Give you an example. I'm all for human free movement of people. It's important. Please visit China, see the multifaceted country to have your own understanding of it. But we should be able to do something when foreign military or European military officers are hired by Chinese army to train their defense forces. This is something that I think between friends or partners you should not be able to do, and the European Union should have answers on this, which it currently doesn't.
Thanks. You develop more of this in your article. I found the education and narrative issue particularly interesting. But coming back to a more classic, like economic definition of de-risking, what have been, in your view, the successes and the shortcomings of the Commission strategy toward China?
I think if you look at the history of the EU-China relations, I think the great success what we have had in the last 5 years is that we have gone away from this Wandel durch Handel approach, which means that we kind of aim to do free trade with China, kind of naively now looking at it, thinking that China might become more like us in terms of economic structure, but also in terms of societal change. I think this has failed, and the European Union, or most of the European Union member states as well, have realized this. We have also been quite good in answering some of the issues which have been raised in the economic sphere. For example, take the case of Lithuania, where the Taiwanese representative office was opened and in Lithuania, and China reacted very harshly on this. We have now an anti-coercion instrument which allows the European Union to respond on Chinese activities, which, for example, in this case, were targeting Lithuanian products. We also have diversified our supply chains. We talk about critical raw materials now. We talk about productions. We talk about also critical parts, chips, for example, and so on. This has been, I think, a success for the European Union. Now, on the other side of the coin, if you look at the forthcomings or at the shortcomings of this policy, we do need to make sure that this, what we have published on paper, also becomes action. Again, I'll give you an example. The European Union already has, in 2019, said that it would develop foreign direct investment screening mechanisms on Chinese investments flowing into China. Now we are in year 2024, and it's still only applicable in 21 countries out of 27. And even if you look at those 21 countries, many of these countries, especially the smaller member states, they have very limited resources to look behind extremely complex acquisitions with Chinese investments. So this is something, even looking at the old issues, we might have to look in the current legislation. I'll take an example from the current legislation. We have now a ban on forced labor act, for example, or a legislative piece. Who is going to go to Chinese plants in regions like Xinjiang or Tibet and classify that plant of having products produced not only by themselves, but also by their suppliers in the regions, which have not done by forced labor? I think myself and also the European Union Chamber of Commerce in China says this is actually impossible to do. So we'll see how this turns into action.
Okay, thank you. Now, as I said, you are now leading the Helsinki office in Brussels. So this gives me the opportunity to explore a bit the Nordic perspective about the relation with China. We know that until a few years ago, Nordic countries were actively seeking to deepen cooperation actually with China. And now things have changed. Why?
Well, I wouldn't say that they're not any more interested in engaging with China, but yes, I understand your question. I think on the broader range, they reacted same way as most of Europe has done in the last years because of the war in Ukraine and the indirect support of China there on the Russian side, even though they don't admit that. Also, of course, the masks diplomacy, wolf warrior diplomacy, what happened during Corona pandemic also has left a mark. But in the Nordic context specifically, I think it has been a development of several events which has gone through the media, which have put an emphasis on China. In Norway, for example, the Nobel Prize Committee gave the prize to Liu Xiaobo, an incarcerated Chinese activist at that point, and China reacted heavily. This was very much publicized in the Nordic sphere. In Sweden, a Swedish Chinese citizen, Gui Minhai, was put in prison in China because of publishing articles on the issues, also for example, in Hong Kong. And he was actually took from a train between Swedish diplomats in China. So these are just singular examples. In the Finnish context, actually, it's interesting to see, and I'm a native of Finland, it's interesting to see that Finland has been quite vocal about China already a lot earlier. So the Finnish strategy on China, for example, 2021 is already extremely cautious on China. But if I look at the same year, 2021, 70% of the Chinese foreign direct investment in the Nordics went to Finland. Yes, it was mainly because of one big purchase, but it shows that the words which are spoken and the actions which happen on the field are not always the same.
And also in 2021, the Finnish security services had sounded the alarm about potential threat from China on Finnish and Nordic's critical infrastructure. And that seemed to be proven right last October with the rupture that was attributed to a Chinese ship of a gas pipeline and 2 telecom cables between Finland and Estonia. Whether this was intentional or not will have to be clarified, but do you think we are protecting our critical infrastructure enough?
Yeah, this is this you have to see. I would see this rather this incident. It was a Chinese, I think Hong Kong flagged ship, New Polo Bear, which disrupted these 2 cables and the gas pipeline. It was actually leaving from a Russian port going to St. Petersburg. Yes, it had a Chinese flag on it. It's still unclear if the ship was out of mistaken issues on board or technical issues dragging its anchor, which weighs, I heard, several thousand kilos for several hundred kilometers, or if there's some malicious intent behind that. So I cannot say on that. But if you look at this incident as a singular incentive, it is very difficult to prevent this kind of event. So what can be done is better monitoring and of ships which are moving in the area, taking a look at them, as well as having more patrols in the area. That is something that all the Scandinavian, actually Nordic countries are currently doing. There was announced an initiative with the Joint Expeditionary Force, the JEF, which is led by the United Kingdom. It's an initiative with 10 countries, which is now patrolling more actively in the Baltic Sea. But of course, this cannot hinder a single ship of dragging its anchor. That's why I would say Europe needs to be, and the Scandinavian, Nordic, Baltic countries need to be build up resiliency. We cannot hinder countries or actors to do the things that they do, but we should have options B, C, and D available if things happen.
Yeah, interesting. So now let's move to have a look to the future, the near future, because this year will be a huge electoral year. Actually, more than half of the world population will cast their ballot this year. This has never happened. It is a historic record. In particular, the elections in the EU, in the US, and in Taiwan will be interesting to follow because they will have an impact on our relation with China. What potential scenarios are you seeing?
Yes, well, I'll focus just on the very short-term possibilities here. You mentioned Taiwan is voting now in January, Europe in June, and the United States in November this year. So looking at the timeline of 1 or 2 years, I feel that whoever will win in Taiwan the election, and there's a close race which has not yet been by this date decided, I don't think that they will do anything very drastic like declare independence from China, which is something where China probably would, according to its own paradigm, have to react. Thus, I think we will look at the European elections. The Taiwanese will want to engage further with democratic countries as they do currently. They want to deepen their ties in areas where they have expertise and in areas where they need our support. Talk about chips from their side. Talk about, for example, Navy Defense Forces engagement in the Pacific from our side, and building up resiliency. The European Union, if I may say so, I think it doesn't matter who will win in the elections. We will still be kind of sitting on the fence. We want to engage with China as we have this trilateral partner, economic rival, systemic rival. We will still want to have China as a partner in some of our areas. We have to have China as partners in some of the areas we work, climate, for example. So we will also not do drastic moves. I don't think it doesn't matter who wins the elections. What we will have to react is if the US does drastic moves in case of a possible Trump second presidency or other areas which might happen, because both Taiwanese and European defense and foreign policy is largely built on the fact that we have the backing of the United States. Now, if this changes, we will have to need to react on that. So I think we look forward to the elections in November. But said this, even though China doesn't have elections this year, I do think that the economic output and the developments in China will have a big influence as well on our actions.
Yeah, that was actually my next question. What influence will actually these weaknesses that have emerged in Chinese economy have on their relationship with us, with the US, etc.?
Yes, I think that the Communist Party and the president of China, they are currently facing a large a crisis, because unlike the state news agency maybe tells you in China, the people in China do realize what's happening currently. They see that companies have been cracked down officially on corruption charges, but also unofficially to taken more power for state-owned companies, for example, for the Communist Party. They do see that local NGOs, I'm not only talking here about foreign NGOs working in China, local NGOs have more difficult to work currently in China. They also see what's happening for national and foreign educational institutes in China, where they send their children, which by the way usually is one, so this is an important thing for every Chinese family, that there have been crackdowns there, and that the party is being more active in having their own let's put it, propaganda being taught to the future generations. Now, I do think that as long as the president and the party of China, Communist Party of China, can keep their promise of one, economic stability, and every year every person has better economic standing, and second, keep peace and societal structures together, there will be no issues domestically in China. But if these one or two of these fail, I do feel that there might be also quick and rapid changes happening in China. This is a concern specifically for the president, because he also has to look within his own ranks in the Communist Party how his future looks like.
So we have an interesting year ahead.
We surely do.
So thank you very much, Janne, for joining us. And for those listening in, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and discover all the interesting insights of the European View on our website, martencenter.eu, and on all our social media channels. Thank you, and stay tuned for more.
Thank you very much.
This was the European View podcast, your place to navigate the insights of our policy journal. Follow the Martens Centre for more.